Well, welcome to another lawnmower repair video. This is a Westwood S1200, which is very similar to the very common T1200. It has the same engine, same gearbox, and even the same deck. It just has a slightly different design, different bodywork, and a few variances to do with the PTO, and under the bonnet, things like different fuel tanks. So not really major things. It just seems more basic. So, this engine here is apparently seized. I did try and pull it over by hand and yeah, it doesn't seem to turn over. What we're going to do is remove the engine, take the sump off and obviously inspect it, see exactly what's going on in there, and hopefully fix it up and get it running again. The deck has seen much better days, so I'll probably just take that off and keep the parts from it to rebuild onto another deck shell in the future. Here's a closer view of the deck. It's just rotting away. Alright, the first step is to remove the oil drain plug. I'm not too sure if this is actually going to go in the pot. Looks like it is just about going in. Bit awkward, not much space. There we go. So we'll check and see if there's any metal shavings in there. You can see there is a bit of discolouring now. Looks more like water though. When the water gets into the oil it goes all creamy. Now because the deck has been removed, I can now turn the engine backwards. Before I was using the pull cord. But because I can turn it backwards now, you can see that it does turn a bit too freely. And then, there we go, we're locked again. Now if we go back in the opposite direction, it will turn freely, and then we're locked. Those pulleys can be quite stubborn. The air hammer is a great tool to use. Anyway, next thing to do is to remove the engine. From the chassis, there's 4 bolts, there is the throttle cable, several wires, and then it should just lift straight out of there. Once I've removed it, I'll also give it a good clean. You can see there's quite a bit of dust and dirt building up on it. Just put some towels under there ready. I don't think there'll be too much that comes out, but there's always going to be a bit of residue. That's interesting. So I wonder if that's given way. I wonder if that's detached and, I don't know, maybe the piston pin came out. We'll find out in a second. Piece of the connecting rod. Sort of the side of the con rod. And then we have some more pieces up here. It's actually surprising that the oil looked as clean as it did. So we have the connecting rod, which leads to nowhere. But it looks like it hasn't really broken into too many pieces, so we're not going to have damage from shrapnel. There is a little piece just on there. But yeah, I'm really hoping there isn't too much damage to the other parts. The first part to inspect is the oil slinger, which is also the governor. Looks like it's okay. Next we have the camshaft. It's always easier to align the timing marks when you remove the camshaft. So can't quite get them lined up because of the piston, which is jamming. but that's close enough. We just had a tappet fall down. This one at the front here will be our exhaust one, which actually is stuck. There we go. May well be slightly bent. They usually just fall down, like the intake one did. Wow, well, I've just discovered why it was so hard to remove that exhaust tappet. It's because there seems to be the other half of the connecting rod embedded into the crankcase. Look at that, that is violent. This obviously opens up quite a few questions. Was the engine running too fast? Did it not have enough oil? That's strange because we drained plenty of oil. It had enough in it. Did somebody refill the oil after it blew up? Or is there just fatigue? Was there fatigue in one of the parts, like the conrod? Did it have a hairline fracture? Was it a factory defect? So many different possibilities, but this is definitely one of those more unusual ones. The next thing to remove is the cylinder head. I want to inspect the top of the piston, try and remove the piston, and see if we can see what's been going on up there. Quite a few things to remove here. Got the fuel tank bracket, the muffler, and the fuel hose brackets as well. The moment of truth. Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary here. This is all looking okay and normal. So I'm just going to try and remove that piston. The piston doesn't seem seized, and the connecting rod didn't seem seized to the crankshaft. And there we have it. Yep, so you can see the piston pin just slides out, which it certainly shouldn't do. It's because the retaining clip has been, it's fallen out as I showed you earlier. But it looks like everything else here is fine. There's no scoring on the pin. No aluminium has transferred, it hasn't smeared onto here. So the issue is certainly further down. You can see that's where there is a break. And the cylinder bore is absolutely fine until you get to here. There's a great big gouge that's probably been caused by the clip. If the clip came loose and then got wedged in between the piston skirt and the cylinder bore, it will have jammed everything up. So is that the reason why the connecting rod snapped? It's going to be very interesting to look in here, because there should be a piece of conrod. Well, there shouldn't be a piece of conrod, but I think there is going to be a piece sticking into here. The valves are ever so slightly open, and there's no camshaft, so it must be the conrod holding them open. Ooh. That is really interesting. Just look at how it's blasted through here. It's completely mangled this spring for the exhaust valve, and it's even removed the retainer from the intake valve. The retainer is still in there, but as you can see, the spring is no longer attached. That's the most interesting conrod snap I've ever seen, I think, because it usually just comes through the side. So now I need to think about what to do for the best. Obviously I can't use this crankcase, it's just far too damaged. If it had just come through the side here, it's usually the other side, then it could just be JB welded up. but clearly this is much more serious. It's just damaged everything. I think even, yeah, these valves, that valve especially, is going to be beyond repair, along with the valve spring. So if I get a good used engine, or maybe just a used engine, then I might be able to salvage some parts off it. So the valves, obviously everything to do with the valves, the springs, the retainers, and also if we can get the crankcase as well. But the thing is, it has to have a good bore, doesn't want to be worn, and it doesn't want to have any other damage. It sheared the keyway, no surprise there. That is everything I need off the original engine. I just need to make sure this crankshaft is good. So when I remove the final piece of the conrod, I'll know what the condition is like. Because I think with the exception of this piece, everything looks really good. That looks really good. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Sometimes the conrod smears the aluminium around here, which is a fixable issue. You can melt it off with acid. And for anybody wondering, this is what the end of the connecting rod looks like. Pretty good. There's the odd little scratch, but nothing substantial. So yeah, it's looking highly likely the issue was not at this end, and it didn't really look to be really at the top of the piston either. It's not like the piston seizing the bore. So really the only thing which is obvious here is that clip, which is unusual. I need to replace the crankcase, so I've just been looking around in my scrap mower parts and I have found this old engine, which seems to be okay. It turns over by hand. That doesn't show us if the bore is any good or if the valves are good, but what I'm going to do is strip it down and then we can inspect everything and see if this is worth using. Obviously it's really grimy, the paint's flaking and it's covered in aluminium oxide, but it doesn't really matter too much because I can clean this up quite nicely and return it to a like new condition. I'm only really concerned about the internals of the crankcase. I'm just going to look inside the cylinder bore. So as you can see, there is oil in here. It looks like it's come through the exhaust valve because that is partially open. But that's fine, that's just because the engine's been tipped over. The side of the bore looks okay. It is quite hard to see on camera. I've removed more parts from the engine, including the sump, and now we can see all of the internal parts, which are covered in this disgusting sludge, a combination of old oil and water. This engine was actually left outside. I don't actually know why the engine was abandoned in the first place. We'll probably find out in a minute or two. But yeah, I can now remove these parts and then we can properly inspect the crankcase. Here's a look at the sump. Just as disgusting, but we probably won't even need the sump. Firstly, there is the oil slinger, and governor. Seems to work. Then we have the camshaft. It's quite hard to see where the timing marks are. It's a bit rusty, but I can't see any damage. Got the valve tappets. Ideally these should be changed. If you buy a new camshaft from Briggs & Stratton, they will probably send you new tappets as well. Doesn't look too bad. It's probably a good piston. With the piston removed, you can really see what the bore looks like. Where the piston actually travels, it looks really good, but at the bottom there is some rust, which really is not unexpected since it's been outside and that area has been filled with water, so it's hopefully going to be fine, because when I hone the engine it should remove all of that and really clean it up. I'm also going to measure the bore just to make sure that it is in spec. It looks like it probably will be. I can't see any ridges, there's no rough spots, there's no lip at the top, so it's looking good, looking promising. It looks nice and clean in there, so I'm just going to remove the valves and then I'm going to put it into a hot wash so I can clean the crankcase up. It probably won't clean it up perfectly, but it'll be a good start. That's the valves out. There was only one casualty when stripping this engine down, and it was just here, where the carburetor attaches to. The bolt just sheared, so I'll try and get that out later. First of all though, a deep clean. To do this I'm using the hot washer. I'm going to set it to about 80 degrees Celsius, and we'll see what it can do to it. So that's removed most of the grease, just leaves behind the aluminium oxide, which can be wire brushed, but as it's going to be painted anyway, I think that'll probably take care of it. So the next thing to do before I clean it again is to hone the bore. Let's just take a look at that. This will need a thorough clean, but you can see I've got the cross hatching on the cylinder wall. It's always hard to tell how well things show up on camera, but hopefully you can see that. It's really cleaned up, and it's also removed the rust. Okay, now I need to take a few measurements just to make sure the bore is within spec. Now the range we're looking for is 87.28 and 87.31, and this one is 87.29. So that is fine. I will continue to take some more measurements, but I did do some earlier just to ensure this was actually viable. But yes, I'm sure it is a perfectly good bore. That one is 87.31, but this isn't 100% accurate, and that is also within spec. Before I give the crankcase one more clean, there is one more thing I need to do, and that is to lap in the valves. The reason why is because the valve lapping paste or compound is very abrasive, and if you don't clean it out properly, you can actually wear parts that you didn't intend to wear out, like the valve stem. So yeah, this needs to be done before the final clean. That's the crankcase and sump repainted. I've also cleaned up all these other internal parts, so they're almost ready to be refitted, except for the piston. I'm going to change the connecting rod. This one doesn't look too bad, but I just don't know the history. It looks like it has done quite a few hours, so a connecting rod is cheap. I'm going to put a new one onto there, and I'm also going to change the piston rings. I fixed the issue just here with the sheared bolt, and I'm also going to change the seal for the governor shaft. I'm actually going to change the governor shaft for the one in the existing engine, just because it looks better. And I have the full gasket rebuild kit, part number 494241. There it is. So everything I need here, except for carburetor parts, is included. We've got the head gasket, we've got the crankcase gaskets, this is the seal for the dipstick tube, exhaust gasket, parts for the air intake gasket just here, oil seals, everything. Next onto the piston, so that is the original, and this is the new connecting rod. They look very similar, as you'd expect, but we do have a bit of a design change here. There's no more locking tabs, and it includes two different size bolts with different torque settings, which do have to be torqued in the correct order. So yeah, end cap on the cam side, that is the most important thing to remember, along with the notch facing the flywheel. That's how it is from model 28 engine. So I'm going to get that changed over, and I'm also going to change the piston rings as well. Here are the new old stock piston rings, and there is the part number. So I'll just show you these. It's amazing how the boxes have changed. The new ones just fall to pieces. You can see the difference between them. This one is nice and rigid, this one is just collapsing. When I picked it up to get it out of the parts store, everything just fell out the bottom. This one's much more solid. I can understand wanting to use less materials for environmental reasons and obviously costs. But yeah, if you're going to do that, maybe tape it. I think a bit of tape would have been fine. Anyway, that's enough of reviewing the boxes. So we have the piston ring installation instructions, and the new piston rings just here. I will be keeping this conrod for a future project, probably a will it run video, because it really isn't too bad. It comes to 45 thou, which is way out of spec. So let's put a new ring in. So that is 12 thou. I've seen better, but that is perfectly within spec. I'm going to change them all over now and rebuild the engine, just the complete reverse of taking it apart. So it's going to be fairly self-explanatory. And for anybody else who is maybe installing the same conrod but didn't get this instruction for whatever reason, I'm sure you will do. Yes, there is the information. And if it is a horizontal shaft engine, you also have the oil dipper as well. That's all the internals done, and I've checked the valve clearances and they're all fine. So now moving on to the head. The head actually is quite good, fairly clean. Got a bit of carbon build up, but I can soon clean that up. We'll put it in the sandblaster, and that will really remove all the carbon, and then it'll be ready to be fitted. I'm at the stage to refit the carburetor, but I've just taken a look inside and it doesn't look that clean. So I'm just going to go through it, clean it all out with carburetor cleaner, and then reassemble it and then put it back onto the engine, and hopefully everything will be fine. As you can see, it's got quite a bit of residue. I think it might be a bit of rust. And everything is very gummy. So as I said, strip it down, clean it up, and rebuild it. Okay, so that's as far as I need to go before I put it back into the machine. So let's get it off the workbench and put it back into the mower.